Hello there. I found another video to look at today. Unlike others that I've had recently, this unfortunately is not going to be filled with a lot of laughs. This one is really quite infuriating. Um, in the middle of the whole mess we're in with the abortion laws that are literally killing women and babies now, the right has really doubled down on something that they've been thinking of for a while. Um, just another thing from their Christian ideology, and by Christian, remember, I mean their weird right-wing evangelical Christian ideology, not normal Christians. Let's take a look at their views of no-fault divorces.
No-fault divorce is very, very bad.
But I think the reform to no-fault divorce is far simpler. It should be reformed by simply ceasing to exist. Marriage is much more than a contract. It's a covenant.
There are a lot of problems with the current legal structure of marriage. I agree with that critique of the current legal structure of marriage. No-fault divorce is one of the worst things that ever happened to Western civilization.
I think she's entitled to nothing during these proceedings. And I think the problem is no-fault divorce.
I still believe that children need a mom and a dad and that divorce is horrible. But in today's legal system, my beliefs don't matter.
We got to get rid of no-fault divorce.
So how's that for an opener? So there's several different things going on here. The main one you can see if you look back at it, they're actually not just going at women, which we'll discuss. This mostly is going to affect women, but they're going back to church and state because they're really conflating the religious marriage contract with a secular marriage license. There is no death do you part or anything like that in a secular marriage license. That would just be insane for the country to tell couples that they were going to be married until they die. That death do us part is a completely religious concept. And while most religions do hold that you should not get divorced, that you're bound together for the rest of your lives, a lot of them have grown and seen that it maybe is not in the best interest of families and children. They're going to talk a lot about children, for unhappy people to have to cohabitate together. You shouldn't have to live your life in such close contact with somebody that you no longer get along with. That can breed hate, contempt, and violence. And no, it's not good for children to live with parents who openly do not like each other. It's just not.
What we're talking about in the American divorce regime is called no-fault divorce. And no-fault divorce is, one, a contradiction in terms. You can't get it. You can't break a contract if there's no fault of anyone. And two, it's horrific for children and it's horrific for the spouses.
I do want to correct something I said. A marriage license is, in fact, a type of contract, but it is a contract for the benefit of the people involved in it. It's a contract that they now have legal rights to certain things. What it doesn't do, however, is it does not keep that till death do us part religious component in there. It doesn't say in a secular marriage license that you are getting married until one of you dies and you can't end it ever for anything.
Marriage is much more than a contract. It's a covenant. To truly go your own way, alone and isolated, is to give up on your duty, your legacy, your ancestors, your bloodline, your civilization, your happiness.
Marriage is a commitment. That commitment is lifelong. There should actually have to be a really, really, really good reason why you are divorcing. And that's particularly true if you have children, because, of course, marriage is designed as the fundamental building block of institutional society. It is the place where children are reared. It is the place where you produce children in the first place. And children require stability.
The traditional response to how you fix marriage is divorce is not allowed.
Okay, but
There's rare circumstances where like a guy is threatening to murder and beating his wife and his kids, and infidelity is one of these things.
No-fault divorce is an absolute tragedy. It is the catalyst for every other degenerate marriage and relationship problem that we have in society.
Wow, she was a little intense. I'm not quite sure what else she's talking about. But yeah, again, just listen to the way that they're talking. They're getting really worked up about this, trying to prove their point. It's a commitment, it's more than just a contract. Bloodlines, legacy, all that kind of nonsense. But really, let's take a look at what they're talking. It all goes back to subjugating women. They're trying to put the genie back in the bottle. Up until recently, what was it, the 60s or so, when divorce started becoming more common, when women were actually able to initiate divorce, uh, men ruled everything. They could marry a woman based on her bloodline if they thought it would be good to produce intelligent children, good-looking children. If she came from a family of money, good breeding, and they could install her in the home. They could have sex with her whenever they wanted to, whether she wanted to or not. They could just make her have child after child to continue their legacy. But they didn't have to love her because, in the end, women stayed in the home, taking care of the home. They had no autonomy. They didn't have money of their own to go anywhere, to anything. And men went out to their jobs, stayed late at work meetings because they could then have whatever woman they wanted on the side. It was, I'm not going to say common, but it was a well-known thing that since women had no right to the family money or anything, they couldn't check the finances, they couldn't go to the bank to inquire about the accounts. Men could very easily have an apartment where they then kept their mistress. This is all about keeping women in their place. Let's take a look at an interview with Senator J.D. Vance back from 2021 while he looks at some numbers, and then we'll see what we can't find out about that.
And this is one of the great tricks that I think the sexual revolution pulled on the American populace, which is this idea that, like, well, okay, these marriages were fundamentally, they were maybe even violent, but certainly they were unhappy. And so getting rid of them and making it easier for people to shift spouses like they change their underwear, that's going to make people happier in the long term. And maybe it worked out for the moms and dads, though I'm skeptical, but it really didn't work out for the kids of those marriages. And I think that's what all of us should be honest about, is we've run this experiment in real time, and what we have is a lot of very, very real family dysfunction that's making our kids unhappy.
This is particularly infuriating to me because in the same thought where he talks about violence as a reason for divorce, he also talks about divorce failing kids. And again, you can argue it both ways. I have friends that come from both sides, and the ones where their parents got divorced, it was a divorce. So they could miss the parent that they didn't see all the time and say that they wished their parents had stayed married. But then you talk to the people whose parents did stay married in a very, very dysfunctional relationship, and they hated it. It was horrible. the stories that they would tell about having to listen to the fights, the emotional violence, the verbal violence, up to physical violence. Because again, you can go from neutral to violence when you are forced to stay in a situation that has just become untenable. You can just go from love to not loving each other anymore. But then if you are forced to stay in close contact, there are all kinds of things that really just can get on each other's nerves, start picking at threads, and it can turn to hate and violence. And that's no way for kids to grow up. It really isn't. I feel like I probably should have written a script for this one instead of just notes because it is pretty infuriating, which I guess is kind of letting my brain jump around more. Um, but this is no fault divorce that they are trying to get rid of. And so there's particular implications with that. First of all, let's just point out that Ronald Reagan, their conservative hero, was the first one to institute the no fault divorces. But there were reasons for the no fault divorce. Number one, in my organization, not in importance necessarily, is the fact that a no fault divorce allows you to not escalate things and have to find blame in the other person that you then put out there in court, in front of their family, in front of their friends. Um, it means you don't have to put your children on the stand. So there could actually be reasons in the marriage that you could get a divorce for, such as certain kinds of violence, emotional trauma, things like that. But the no fault divorce then allows you to not have to have an open fight and involve everyone else. Um, it also helped women in a lot of ways because it meant that they could get financial support from the divorce. Because remember, when this started, women, it was rare that they worked outside of the home for anything more than women's jobs, part-time jobs. So women's jobs were wife and mother. So when they had to leave the marriage, they didn't have job skills. They didn't have a resume. They didn't have savings because husbands owned all the money. Women had no rights to that. So the no fault divorce was just an easier way to handle the divorce, not an easier way to get divorced, but to handle divorce rather than a protracted fight, an all out war. And let's take a look at some of the numbers. You can see in the 60s, it was pretty low, the divorce rate. There was a jump in the 80s. That was kind of like the learning curve. People were still getting married very, very young, and then just growing and changing. Um, but you can see the divorce rates settled back down. People are getting married later. They're able to know a little bit better who they are before they do choose somebody, and things are leveling out. So for them to keep insisting that the divorce rates are rising and that's why something needs to be done, again, it is just their way of trying to assert control. Well, I hope you found this interesting. If I see anything else on it, we can take a look at it again. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you very much. See you soon.